are doing lesson 9.3, equivalent fractions and decimals. Our essential question says, how can you record tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals? Daniel spent a day hiking through a wildlife preserve. During the first hour of the hike, he drank 6/10 liter of water. How many hundredths of a liter did he drink? Okay, over here in the green box it says underline what you need to find. What do we need to find? Dakota?
How many hundredths of a liter did he drink?
Very good. How many hundredths of a liter did he drink? So underline that.
Give me it. Look, it's a different passcode.
Okay, Trinity and Reese, you guys need to mute your microphone. You need to be on lesson 9.3, okay? And we've just started. It says, how can you represent hundredths? How have we learned to represent hundredths so far? Landon?
Put a 0 next to the 6, and then
But how can we show hundredths? How have we learned to write hundredths? Shelby?
a model.
Huh?
A model.
No. Let's go back and read the essential question real quick. How can you record tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals? How have we learned to record hundredths? Fractions and decimals. Someone in the other class mentioned that we've also learned to write them in word form too, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
Fractions, decimals, and then also word form. Trinity and Reese, can you see the TV? Okay, both of you are muted.
Not really.
You can't see it?
Yes. Not really. Not really.
I'm not sure how you can't see it, but Reese can, because you're looking at the same thing. Maybe work together. Maybe he can see it where, and help you out. Okay, so in the first blank, we write fractions, decimals, and word form. Okay, so I'm going to tell you as I write it too, and I'll start writing in black. Okay, do you guys have this paper in front of you? Reese and Trinity?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, it says write 6/10 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10. So this is what they've given us. Eyes up here, Shelby. They've given us 6/10. And they want us to write that as hundredths. So we're going to start by shading 6 of the 10th size pieces. To do that now, shade 6 of the 10th size sections. And I want to remind you guys that the big one here represents a whole. So this represents a whole, this represents a tenth, this represents a hundredth. So we just shaded 6/10, right? Now, if we come over here, it says, what do we multiply? We need to get the 10 turned into 100. What do we multiply 10 times to get 100? Ethan?
10.
And if we do it to the bottom?
Do it to the top.
So we're going to write 10 here and 10 here. 6 times 10 is what?
60.
60. So how many little hundredths are we going to shade?
60.
60. So that means we're going to shade the same amount that we shaded before, but there's 10 times as many because they're 10 times smaller. So now we've shaded 6 tenths and 60 hundredths. So underneath where we shaded 60 hundredths, we're going to write 60 hundredths. Now I also showed you guys this. You can multiply times 10 each time, but it's much easier to just do this. Add a 0, and if we do it to the bottom,
Do it to the top.
and now let's go look at it as a decimal. How do you write 6 tenths as a decimal? Well, we didn't shade any holes, did we? And there we shaded 6 tenths, and then we shaded 60 hundredths. So 0 holes, decimal point, 6 in the tenths place, 0 in the hundredths place. So Daniel drank 60 hundredths, 0.60, or 60 over 100. And the decimals are the same way. We started out with 0.6, and if we want to turn that into hundredths, we add a 0 behind it. So to go from tenths to hundredths, we add a 0. To go from hundredths to tenths, we take off a 0. Okay? All right. Says explain why 6 tenths is equivalent to 60 hundredths. There are 10 there are 10 hundredths in 1 tenth. So there are 60 hundredths in 6 tenths. Okay. Are you guys able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. There are 10 hundredths and 1 tenth. So in 6, there would be 60 hundredths and 6 tenths. Okay. Turn it to the next page after you're finished. It says up here in this box, explain how you can write 0.2 as hundredths. So if we have 0.2, how is that read? Landon, how do you say this? Ella? 2 tenths. It's a 2 in the tenths place, right? Think of it in a place value chart. We don't have anything in the ones place, so we don't say anything. And then we have 2 in the tenths place, okay? So we say the place of whatever the last digit is, or the last place value that has a digit in it. So, it says, how can you write 2 tenths as hundredths? Well, you can stick a 0 on it, and then it goes from 2 tenths to 20 hundredths, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Next page. Jasmine, now we're going to go the other way. They're going to start out giving us hundredths, and then we have to go back to tenths. So it says Jasmine collected 30 hundredths of a liter of water in a jar during a rainstorm. How many tenths of a liter did she collect? So we're looking, it says equivalent decimals are decimals that name the same amount. You can write 0.30 as a decimal that names tenths. So it says show 30 hundredths in the place value chart, so that would be 0.30. And if you look at it, there are no hundredths there, are there? So that means we can just take that 0 off and turn it into 3/10 or 0.3. Okay, another way we can write 30 hundredths as a fraction with a denominator of 10. So it says start by writing, or step 1, write 30 hundredths as a fraction. 30 hundredths is how many hundredths? 30. 30 hundredths written as a fraction is 30 over 100. So write 30 hundredths as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10. So if we start with 30 hundredths, what do we have to divide 100 by to get to 10?
10.
And if you do it to the bottom, and what is 30 divided by 10? 3. Good. So Jasmine collected 3/10 or 0.3, 3/10 liter of water. Okay. It says write 4/10 as hundredths. First, we start with the fraction 4/10, and we multiply 4/10 by 10 over 10. That gives us 40 hundredths. So the fraction would be 40 hundredths. Then in a place value chart, we start with 4/10, and in order to say the word hundredths, we've got to stick a 0 in there. So the decimal would be 40 hundredths, or 0.40. Okay, after you finish that, flip it to the next page. We're going to do 6 problems together, and I'm going to show you exactly what I want you to do, Owen, including what to write down and circle in the directions. The directions are going to be critical today, that you read the directions carefully. For 2, 3, and 4, the directions say, write the number as hundredths in fraction form and decimal form. So since they want us to use hundredths on this one, Cash, to help me out, I'm going to write the number 100 right above this, just to remind myself that on these problems, I'm using the denominator of 100. And then I'm going to underline fraction form. I'm going to circle the word and to remind me that they want 2 answers, and underline decimal form. So number 2 says 7/10. The very first thing that I want you to do, so we need to be getting 7/10 turned into hundredths as both a fraction and a decimal. The very first thing I want you to do is right up top, I want you to write 7/10 as a decimal. Okay, so that you've got it in both forms. So 7/10 equals 0.7, which says 7/10 also, right? So 7 in the 10th place. Now it's time to turn these into hundredths. It's gonna be hard. Take a breath. You ready?
Add a 0.
You're going to go 0, 0, 0. Okay, we're done. But actually, you're not gonna, that's not, I want you to actually write the answer. I don't want you to do that. I want you to write the answer down here. So 70 hundredths and 0.70.
Everybody will get this. Easy.
Yeah.
Wow, this is easy.
Okay, now listen up. So this, Sonia, how do you say this?
0.2. Wait.
No, your name is not Sonia. Sonia, how do you say this?
0.5.
Okay, how do you read it correctly? With place value. What? What place is that 5 in, Sonia? The way that you read this is not 0.5. That's what we say so we know what to write down. But the way you read this is, since there's nothing here, we don't say anything. We only say 5/10. So since this is 5/10, we need to write 5/10 in fraction form too to start with. Now we've got the decimal and the fraction for 5/10, and we need to turn those into hundredths. So the decimal for 5/10 turned into hundredths would be 50 hundredths, right? Just add a 0 to the back. 5 becomes a 50 and 10 becomes 100. So 50 hundredths. Okay? 3/10. How do you write 3/10 as a decimal? Landon?
0.3.
0.3. And now as hundredths, we're gonna write 30 hundredths and 0.30. Okay. On the next one, the instructions say write the number as tenths. So I'm gonna write a little 10 above that in fraction form and decimal form. So we're gonna start by writing this exact thing as a fraction. How do you write this number right here as a fraction? Sophie?
40 hundredths.
40 over 100. Very good, Sophie. Nice job. Now, Sonia, since we're going, since our directions tell us to write it as tenths, we're going to take off this 0, and this 0. So down here on our answer line, we're going to write a 0 and 4/10, and then 4 over 10, which is read as 4/10. Okay, next, they've given us 80 hundredths. How do you write that as a decimal, Waylon?
0.8.
0.80, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, good, give yourself a point. Now, we gotta turn it into tenths like our directions say. So we're gonna write 8 over 10 and 0.8. And last, they've given us 20 hundredths. How do we write 20 hundredths as a decimal, Colin?
0.20.
0.20. Now we're going to come down here and write it as tenths. 2/10 and 0.2. Okay. So, does anyone have any questions before we get started? Okay. So I'm going to have you guys complete just exactly like we did here. Exactly like this. Have you complete these next 6 problems? And make sure that you keep track of what they're wanting you to write. And then raise your hand and I'll come and check them. And that is it for the video.